William Wallace, Robert the Bruce, Sir James Douglas. These fighters for Scottish independence roll off the tongue, don't they? But have you heard about Black Agnes? All too often, history seems to be stories about big men doing important things. And I like to remind folk of the heroic women in Scottish history. So when Harry Anderson dropped me an email at requests@scotlandhistorytours.co.uk to say, why don't you tell the story of Black Agnes, I thought that is a belting idea. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right hand side of the screen. In the meantime, let me tell you a story. It's 1338. The hard-won independence achieved by Robert the Bruce had only lasted 4 years before we faced new invasions from the south, throwing the nation once again into turmoil. Now, I made a series of 3 videos giving an overview of the Second War of Scottish Independence. So as not to repeat myself and go over the same old ground, I'll leave a link to those videos at the end. But 7 years into this second independence struggle, Scotland was partly occupied by Edward III of England. At the time, we had 2 kings. Edward III had installed Edward Balliol as England's puppet king, but the Scots patriots were still fighting for David II. And to regain our freedom, obviously. One of the men that had been at the forefront of the fight back was Thomas Randolph, Earl of Murray. He'd been a close friend of Robert the Bruce and a valiant warrior at his side. In fact, Bruce had rewarded him with the title Earl of Murray. After Bruce's death in 1328, Randolph had led the fight for Bruce's son, David II, during this Second War of Independence. But in 1332, Randolph himself had died. Now his daughter had been married to the powerful border magnate Patrick, 9th Earl of Dunbar, and she was thus ensconced here at Dunbar Castle. Now with Patrick off fighting against Edward III's forces in the north, Edward's close confidant William Montague, the 1st Earl of Salisbury, must have thought that an undefended castle would be an easy trophy. Montague was about to find out that the daughter of Thomas Randolph was a chip off the old block. Montague and his troops arrived to lay siege to the castle and its skeleton staff on the 13th of January 1338. Now it's just a it's a ruin, isn't it, right? But in its day, this waterfront castle with 2 grand courtyards on either side of an arched waterway would have looked absolutely magnificent. But with nothing to defend it but the dusky, dark-haired Agnes Randolph and her staff. When Mortimer demanded that this feeble lady turn over the castle, she surprised him by sending him a message saying, "Of Scotland's king I had my hoose, I pay a meeting fee, and I will keep my good old hoose, while my hoose will keep me." That was Scots rhyme for no. And so Montague got out his Siege Catapult. If you'd been here standing as one of the occupants of the castle back in those days, you would have seen massive rocks hurtling towards you from these medieval artillery pieces. People would have been running about here, hither and thither, running in all directions looking for any safe corner. But when the bombardment was over, Agnes got her maids to dress up in their Sunday best, go up to the ramparts and dust the battlements with her handkerchief as if to say, "Did you hear something, Maisie?" "No, but the dust on these ramparts is a disgrace. When was the last time that they were cleaned?" Okay, so the shelling of stones was met with stoicism. What next? Montague brought up another piece of siege equipment called a sow. This was a huge battering ram, but it was more than a battering ram. It had a wooden roof to protect the attackers from arrows as they battered down the front door. They would have had it covered with wet hides so that it wouldn't catch fire if fire was thrown down on it. They had thought of everything. Apart from the fact that their earlier bombardment had provided the defenders with huge boulders to drop in the sow from above, which smashed it to pieces and sent the attackers running for cover as Agnes mocked from the ramparts. That bit they'd overlooked. Take 3. Okay, If the direct approach didn't work, it would have to be subterfuge. Now, the main gate must have been down here somewhere. So Montague bribed the gatekeeper to leave the gate unlocked so that the English could break in. The gatekeeper agreed and pocketed the cash. At the appointed time, when the English approached the castle, they found the portcullis open. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the portcullis dropped shut like a trap, capturing the first man through. Fortunately for Montague, who had been in the lead, an enthusiastic follower had jumped ahead of him just as they reached the gate. And as the hapless soldier was captured, Montague and the rest of his men fled up here as Agnes stood in the rampart shouting, "Farewell, Montague, I had intended that you would have supped with us." In other words, "Ya fanny!" Take 4. Now the gloves were off. Sometime before, in a completely separate event, Agnes's brother, the third and the current Earl of Moray, had been captured in an ambush. So Montague had him brought here to Dunbar, paraded in full view of the castle, a noose put around his neck, and told Agnes that if she didn't surrender the castle, he would hang her brother. This was dirty. From the battlements, Agnes cried out that her brother was childless, so that if Montague hung him, then she would inherit the title. So hang away. Don't! Take 5. So Agnes's gamble had worked, and they didn't hang her brother. Montague decided to starve them out. A cordon was put all around the landward points of entry so that no supplies could enter the castle. Now it was just a case of waiting. But in Edinburgh, shortly after that, Sir Alexander Ramsay Dalhousie had got wind of what was going on. So he got a small group of men, went to the coast, got hold of some boats, and he brought supplies and provisions to the castle via a hidden door on the seaward side. Not only did this small force burst through the front door of the castle to surprise and scatter the English advance guard, but having done so, Agnes organised with great fanfare and procession that her servants should go out and deliver to Montague a batch of fresh baked bread and some fine wine. Agnes had foiled every attempt made by Montague, on top of which, for 5 months, on a daily basis, she'd stood on the battlements shouting, "Ya fanny!" or some such thing to insult her English besiegers. By the 10th of June, Montague had had enough. He finally realised that the space between his legs was meant for a tail, and he headed home, leaving the dusky, dark-haired Black Agnes the victor. For more on the Second Scottish Wars of Independence, click this video here. In the meantime, ha mynd o'ch ysgwyn bí lama alive. Cheerio and Rasta.